Glovebox Live's Nick John interviews singer-songwriter Grace Petrie.
It's never too late to recapture the benefits of Section 28, and it's never too wild to slash benefits for single mums. The only victim is the child, and oh, who's gonna be my Martin Luther King? And I'll say, who's gonna be my Harvey Milk? And on the steps of Parliament, well, they're demonstrating, but what's the use when they're all cut from the same Eton silk? I'll say farewell.
Anyway, I wanted to ask you first question. Not many folk artists make the journey from comedy to folk. Was this something you did? Did they run concurrently, or did one lead to the other?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. The thing to remember about my life and career is that absolutely nothing has been done by design. It's all just happened by accident, and I've been very lucky about the way things have fallen. But basically, my beginnings in comedy can be traced back to basically Glastonbury 2010, when I was playing Billy Bragg's Left Field stage at Glastonbury, and that was where I met Josie Long and Robin Ince. And then both of them, from meeting me and seeing me there, both of them asked me to tour with them. So I kind of started, and the first time I ever really worked in comedy, it was as tour support for Josie Long. And there were people who were quite uncomfortable with being faced with music when they paid to see comedy. So I sort of realised that I could just get them on side a little bit more if I spoke a little bit and tried to. I mean, I would never describe what I do as comedy, but I think the sort of in-between jokes and the in-between song banter became a much more sort of prominent part of the act through touring with stand-up. So I just kind of learned how to do it. And comedy audiences react very differently than music audiences as well. So, and then it's kind of... I think
they're
it's
almost like two separate scenes in my head.
Oh, entirely, different scenes.
Yeah.
And, I think there's things that I can get away with doing... there's things that I would do at a folk club that are far more earnest than I would ever do at a comedy show, and vice versa, there's things that I could get away with at a comedy show that I probably wouldn't try in a folk club. So, but it's I think it's really, I've been lucky actually to have a kind of foot in both camps, because at the end of the day, the thing that they have in common, I guess, is about storytelling, isn't it? Storytelling is a huge part of comedy, and folk is storytelling music. So I think it's the prominence of the words is the sort of thread that ties them together, I'd say. Yeah.
And you're quite determinedly keeping both strands going, aren't you?
It's kind of developed that way, yeah. I mean, I've been very lucky to do a lot of work with the Guilty Feminist podcast, which is obviously a comedy endeavour, and I was part of their live tour this year. I've done a lot of work with Robin Ince, and I'm doing some more tour support for comics coming up, actually. And then it's sort of just through working in that world that I've kind of had some other kind of comedy gigs thrown my way, like I've done the Now Show a few times, and had some stuff going on at the Edinburgh Fringe. But I am sort of, it makes me feel very, how can I put this? It really exacerbates the imposter syndrome, I think, to kind of be regarded as someone who works in comedy when I am definitely not a comedian, But I think it's, to steal a line or to paraphrase a line from Tim Minchin, I think people come to see me and they'd say that I'm very funny for a folk singer and a pretty good singer for a comedian, So I think
that's lovely. I like
that. Yeah, I can sort of do.
Because all performers have this imposter thing, don't they?
Absolutely,
Even in how someone's going to shout at the back, you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we found you out. Yeah, complete. I've got a whole song about it. Yeah. So, but I think it's a real, especially in this kind of, I mean, to use a horrible word, but in this kind of market, I suppose, the way that the entertainment, it's an economy like any other economy, and I think it's a real string to your bow, I think, to be able to do more than one thing. And it's certainly, this year, if I take 2019 as an example, I've been able to do 2 different comedy tours and then about 3 different music tours, so I've actually toured just the UK. This is going to be my 6th tour of the year, in different lineups. So it just means that I can pretty much always be working.
You're Radio 4 for for comedy,
Radio
Radio 2 for
exactly, yeah, basically, yeah.
Do you have to get your
I'm
head...
taking over the BBC, one station at a time, yeah.
Do you have to get your head in a different space when you do a different tour? Or do you switch naturally between the two concerns?
I mean, I think what I do doesn't change really overly, particularly, because I think, you know, audiences that come to see music, they're perfectly happy to kind of, you know, laugh along with something that's funny. And likewise, you know, I think comedy, all good comedy in my opinion anyway, has to have some sort of, you know, message to it underpinning it. It has to exist for a reason, do you know what I mean? I think all the best comedy does anyway. So I think particularly singing about politics, it sort of sits pretty naturally in both of those two realms without me really having to kind of change what I do very much. And I think what I am quite lucky to have written so much material. You know, I've written 6 albums over the last, 7 albums over the last 10 years, and because there's just such a huge back catalogue, I can sort of diversify the set quite a lot based on where I am and who I'm playing to. And also it does mean that if someone has seen me, you know, 4 times in a year, it's perfectly possible that they'll have seen 4 completely different sets.
If I may be so bold as to say that your archaic view of family holds no relevance today, and if you think that honest people really should be turned away from IVF and B&Bs just because they're gay, I suggest you stop requesting that we continue to pay our taxes to a party that's held us back all the way. So I'll take my business and my
so yeah, I'm kind of constantly trying to keep things fresh, I suppose.
You said, I believe, that walking into folk, the folk room, was like walking into a foreign country.
Did I say that? Sure, yeah.
So I'm guessing that, so you'd written a lot of, we'll call them contemporary songs and things, with political lyrics and social lyrics and things like this, before you sort of found yourself in the folk camp, as it were. Is that fair enough?
Well, yeah, but what I'd say is that, I mean, I think that folk, especially in Britain, I think a really bad PR job has been done on folk, you know, because actually most people outside of the folk scene, I think, have a completely sort of incorrect understanding and inaccurate understanding of what folk actually really is. I mean, you know, I grew up, my interpretation of what folk was based around people like Bob Dylan and Joni Mitchell, who are singer-songwriters, and not doing anything traditional. You know, traditional music wasn't something that I really knew anything about, which is funny when you think that for all that time I considered myself a folk singer, and I had a real chip on my shoulder about not being booked at folk festivals. You know, and when, you know, the traditional folk festivals, bless them, you know, they would come back to me and say, well, you know, we book folk artists and traditional folk artists, and that's not, you know, fit that criteria.
Well, that's a legacy going back to sort of the folk revival, isn't it?
Entirely,
and the folk clubs.
Yeah, absolutely.
More than the gigging circuit that we've now got.
Absolutely, yeah. But I think that I have a lot more. I regret. I mean, I hope that I get less of an idiot as I age. That's always the aim. But I kind of regret a lot of things that I said about the folk scene earlier on in my career and when I was younger, because now I just know a lot more about it. I understand a lot more about folk music. I realised that actually, you know, there are a lot of those festivals where I wouldn't naturally sit. You know, if you've come to see traditional music, I can completely appreciate that what I do is a million miles away from that. It's just that, you know, so few people sort of know so much about the gorgeous, incredible and very rich history of traditional folk music, you know, and how radical, you know, those songs are, you know.
I think it should be taught in schools.
Absolutely,
it's ridiculous, you know.
Yeah, and that, you know, increasingly I sort of don't know how much what I do sort of does really belong in the folk realm, but I do think that, you know, it encompasses so many different things, the word folk. It's such a broad church, and definitely on the kind of contemporary folk music singer-songwriter end of it, I think I've kind of been lucky that I've gotten enough gigs in folk to kind of pick up the people who appreciate what I do and like what I do, you know, and will kind of come with me to my own gigs, probably outside of the folk scene, outside of the folk clubs now. But I mean, I still love playing folk clubs and I love playing folk festivals, and I'll go for as long as I'm tolerated.
I know you've
I'll be there.
done Miranda Sykes has played on the album.
Yes, yeah.
And I've interviewed Steve Knightley and Phil a lot, and Steve says exactly what you say,
Right.
About moving things and the contemporary with the traditional. And
Yeah,
things like this.
absolutely,
And I think it's really important to do that. You've also said you're going to be fusing. Or you'd like to fuse contemporary songs to traditional tunes.
I've dabbled in that a little bit, and I think so because my introduction to what I would describe as proper folk music came from playing with Coven, which is the kind of band made up of me and Lady Masery and Ohuli and Tito, and I've been sort of trying to kind of dabble in I think it's certainly influenced my songwriting since I kind of discovered a lot more about it. But I mean, I definitely still feel like, when I'm around people like, the other Coveners and kind of proper folk musicians, I definitely still feel like, I'm just absolutely still barely learning the language that they're all completely fluent in, But it's a wonderful thing because there's just so much out there,
Yeah, as you say, there's just
endless time to just dip into this huge ocean of songs. Yeah,
that's really good. And I've heard you're looking at a live album. Is that for?
That's the plan.
And
at some point.
Album.
A lot of the older stuff was recorded basically on a shoestring, and a lot of it was done before I went professional. It was kind of done in evenings and weekends in people's bedrooms and pulling in a lot of favours, which was for a long, long time. I made my money from selling CDs. That's the only way I was really paying rent for years and years. I was selling way more merch than I was ever getting paid for gigs. CDs, to my mind, were just a source of income. And then I suppose it is quite a folk thing. I think, again, since I've been working more seriously on the folk scene, that idea of how highly prized the recording is in folk, how much the record is something that is so much prominence is placed upon. Whereas for me, certainly before I made Queer as Folk, it was I've got 12 songs and I need to sell them, so I'll get them down on this. And, I think a lot of the older albums, they are, if you want to buy the song, then if you want to own the song, you can get them that way. But certainly they don't necessarily do the best justice to the songs. And a lot of the songs, I've been playing for 12 years now, and a lot of the songs that were on the first couple of albums, they've changed a lot in the set, they've evolved a lot over time, so there's new arrangements and things. That's the idea, is to sort of take some of that old material and kind of give it a recording that does it justice, I suppose.
Yeah, and some of the lyrics that you wrote back then, they probably still apply now.
Unfortunately,
Nothing,
I long for the day that it goes out of date, some of that stuff,
Well, I don't think there'll ever be a time where, protest singers, contemporary singers have nothing to protest about, sadly.
Yeah, I've got no sign of retiring anytime soon, sadly,
No, well, thank you very much for talking to us. And
no, thank you.
Wish you well for next year.
Cheers, thanks very much, Nick. Cheers.
To tear apart the welfare state and all that ever made Britain great, while those who sleep in palaces tonight, they're still doing alright. They're still doing alright. Thank you very much.
That was a broadcast production by Glovebox Live.uk.